I want you to imagine with me, if you will, being in that first century church, which actually probably didn't mean building. Ecclesia meant a gathering of people. More than likely in someone's house. It could be in a catacomb somewhere. It could even be out in the woods, maybe around a bonfire. And most scholars think that Mark was probably a story that everybody told, or not everybody, that the sages who told that story probably told it all in one sitting. And all that excitement, all that movement, all that immediacy that's in Mark's gospel, and all the dirt that gets flown around, all the movement, all the excitement that's happening, and we get to the end of this, we know that they're going to the tomb. Surely there has to be some other kind of climactic moment that's going to happen, and at the very end of it, we hear they were horrified. They went away, and they told no one. Can you imagine sitting in that first century church, hearing that gospel laid out, and it ending that way? How did it feel? Felt incomplete? Looked at each other and wondered, what is the pastor doing this Easter? But that's what Mark, or the sage who uses the name Mark, that's what he did. He left the story unfinished and he sat down, or stopped, or whatever way, whether he walked out of the house, it ended right there. Can you imagine how those people, how they were risking their lives to be in church, how they must have felt, until they started to realize something. The story is unfinished, and we become part of it. They become part of it. We get drawn into the story, they get drawn into the story, and they realize they are in the active role of witnessing. They are the witnesses of Jesus. That's what Peter and Mark realized. Or Peter and Mark who wrote it, but also Paul realized they were the witnesses of Jesus. They were the ones to take that testimony forward. And the Greek word for witness is martyr. They knew that witnessing was going to possibly cost them their lives. But they went forth from that first century church, thrilled to be part of that story of Jesus, excited to be able to go out and share the witness of what Jesus did in the world to bring the good news. Jesus hung on the cross, yes, to take away sin. I'm not going to argue with that. But Jesus also hung on the cross to reveal to us what agape love, what a selfless love is all about. He completely gave up self to hang on that cross for us. And that becomes the good news. How He, in the same flesh and blood, the same bones that we have, He was able to go through this world and experience the brokenness of this world, broken relationships by being betrayed, denied and deserted. He revealed to us that in that same blood and flesh and bone, we can do the same thing. That's what the gospel is all about. And that first century church got swept up in that story. And even in the midst of all the persecution, they still added to the numbers of the church. They still continued to grow. They became relevant to each community they were in because they were about caring for others. Not making judgments of who they are, but caring for them, reaching out, sharing the good news and sharing whatever they had as a people in the community. In fact, one Roman emperor is quoted writing to a governor over in Palestine to do something because these crazy Christians who they're persecuting, they're caring for the people better than we are. And they're winning the hearts of the people. not by a force of legions of military might, but by caring and loving for people even if it meant they were going to die. That's the good news of the church. Peter knew that. That's what he is professing before the Jewish leaders, before the synagogue, before the temple. He's saying, I have this story of Jesus Christ to tell you. This story of love. That's what we're about. That's why we go out in the community and do what we do. Because what Jesus did for us. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, who is just trying to lay down for these Greeks this understanding of resurrection, he uses relationship. For him, the proof that Jesus has been resurrected is how his life turned around. How he was forgiven. How forgiveness is a cornerstone of witnessing to Jesus Christ. Because Paul says, can you believe this? God, through Jesus Christ, called me into this ministry. And remember who I was. I was a persecutor of the church. I chased them into the deepest corners. I held their coats while they warmed up and let it go to stone Stephen. But God saw through all of that. God was, through Jesus Christ, was able to forgive me for all of my past sins and set me upon my feet, set me on this journey. And because Christ moved with that love of forgiveness, now I am challenged to move with that same love of forgiveness and to be one who lifts up Christ as the good news of God's love. The first century church grabbed onto that. We know that because Acts literally explodes around the Mediterranean Sea. The good news of Jesus Christ can't be stopped by any barrier. Well, what about women? They're brought into the kingdom too. They're part of the good news. They're part of the story. Well, what about Ethiopian eunuchs? Oh, they're part of the good news. They're part of the story. God pulls them in through this radical love. What about Gentiles? It doesn't matter. You don't have to circumcise them. They're brought into this kingdom because of God's uncontrolled love, and they're part of the story too. And it goes on and on and on, exploding and morphing and changing and just going across the Roman Empire, and not even the force of the empire can stop it. That's the good news of Jesus Christ. The power of love and forgiveness that nothing can stop. It didn't just move that stone away from the door of the tomb. It blew out through the Roman Empire and left soldiers and legions irrelevant in trying to stop it. And it's a story that we are a part of. It's a witness that we are challenged to carry forth from this place. It's great that we gather here on Easter, and it's great to see the numbers, but the story doesn't end here. It just begins here. Story of forgiveness that can conquer any boundary, any barrier that we build up. I'm reminded of a story that I read about two young people, 12-year-olds actually, two little children. And I'm sure you remember the story in the media not too long ago. But they were playing cops and robbers, and when they were in the one house, they came across a handgun. Now, it wasn't sitting out in the open. They went through the drawers as they were playing in the house, and they came across it. And they thought, oh, this would be great to use for our playtime. And they started playing. But unfortunately, one of them figured out how to take off the safety. And it wasn't long before a child was laying on the floor dying. And did die. It was an explosion in the media. John, a 12-year-old, killed his play friend Marie. What reason, what motive was it? It was a child that had something in their hands and didn't know what it was, and someone died, or died because of that. And so the families knew each other. And Marie's family refused to press charges. They said, we know John and his family. We have grown up with them. We've gone to church with them. We know that there was no motive. It was an accident. And they refused to press charges. But in a death like that, there still has to be an investigation. And while it was going on, the media had a field day. And John went into his room and refused to come out. Would barely talk to the tutor that was coming to help him with his schoolwork. And finally, after the dust settled, the investigation proved that it was nothing but an accident. The media left. The investigators left, but John still refused to come out of his room. And finally, about 2 weeks later, Maria's older brother shows up at the door. And when John's parents answer the door, he says, "Well, what do you want?" He says, "I want to see John. I think it's time for him to get back to school." We tried. But he doesn't want to leave his room. He doesn't want to go through what the kids are going to put him through at school. Maria's older brother says, I know what they do at school. And I've talked to the principal, and I think we can change that. Let me talk to John. And so he goes in and he talks to John, and there's really nothing recorded about what he said, but whatever he said brought John out of the room. And they went together to school. And instead of going to his middle school, he went over to the elementary school. And John saw him talking to the principal. And before he knew it, John heard an announcement that there was going to be a special assembly. So at the assembly, as all the hundreds of kids were gathered around, Maria's brother took the mic. He says, "I'm at the middle school now, but," he says, "I do know what elementary school's like. I know how we can be cruel to each other. I know how we can tease each other. And I'm asking you not to tease John. In spite of what you saw on the news, it was an accident. It was an accident that John feels as bad, if not worse, than us. And I don't want you to tease him. In fact, I want you to care for him. I want you to think about him. I want you to think about the hurt that he's going through." He says it was an accident. And I know Maria wouldn't want him to be teased any more than she'd want any of you to be teased for this. So please, leave him alone. The story is that amazingly they did. John did not get harassed by the people. He felt the forgiveness that he heard coming out of John's mouth. He knew, or Maria's brother's mouth. He knew that family, but he wanted to hear it, and he finally did. And he was able to get on with his life. He was able to get on with his schooling. He was able to get on being a young child. And it happened because of forgiveness. Not any theological discussion on the forgiveness of the triune God, but forgiveness that was lived out in the community with Marie's family and with the school. That's what created wholeness and healing. That's what the cross and the resurrection tells us. That the forgiveness that Jesus explained to us, that Jesus revealed to us from the cross, is what we are to take out into the world. Jesus was held there not by the nails, but by the love that God had for the world. And Jesus didn't hang from the cross and say, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Except for that one, I don't like the way he slapped me. Except for her, I don't like the way she spit on me. Except for, there were no choosing and picking. Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they do not know what they do." He's challenging the church to learn how to forgive. To take that story of forgiveness that seems to be unfinished, because it is. And Jesus is asking us, the church, to finish that story. To live out that witness of forgiveness and love in the world. With no prerequisites. Just a love that God revealed to us in Jesus Christ is the same love that we are to take out through these doors, outside these walls, into community and around the world. Share the good news of God's love. The Lord is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.